Corporations are moving out of Washington State at a higher rate than any other state in America. Is that shocking? No, it's not shocking at all. Today, here in Washington State, we have the highest gas prices in all of the land. Yeah, we got this little carbon tax put in place. My state is just hosed. Let's get into it. Here we go. You know, Washington State used to be the state everybody was moving into because we didn't have an income tax. We were a fairly pro-business state back in the day. But now, no, you got to tax the F out of everybody to be able to afford all the social programs we have going on, right? I mean, throwing tents at all these homeless people, that doesn't come cheap. Somebody's got to pay for it. You got to put all these taxes in place. Yeah, the high gas prices, I saw that this morning and I was like, yeah, that's about right. That figures. Yeah, really high gas. I think the average price of gas in Washington State right now is in Puget Sound or whatever. It's like almost $5. The news story I saw today, a gas station over by my kid's house in Seattle was $5.39. I mean, it's getting expensive. You're like, oh, yeah, that's not good. That's not cheap. What are we doing here? Well, we're doing a bunch of stuff that really doesn't have any overall meaning to anything, but Governor Inslee seems to think so, and the other constituents in my fine state seem to think so. So they're all rah, 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 rah. Carbon tax, greatest thing ever. It's all going to be great. It's all going to be great. Approximately 9% of America's corporations moved headquarters since the beginning of 2022, the highest rate since 2017, with most corporations moving to Florida, Texas, and Arizona. Is that just not shocking at all? I would have said Florida and Texas for sure. Arizona, yeah, we've got a ton of people from Washington State that have moved, or typically it's a retirement situation, or they've got kids in high school and they're dying to get them out of the high school system here in Washington State. So they jet off to Florida, Texas, not as many to Arizona. A lot of retirees going to Arizona, but a lot of retirees going to Florida as well. So you've got options. The states that corporations were most likely to abandon were numero uno, Washington State, where I am, New York, and California. Why are those not shocking? Those are the most likely to be abandoned. Washington State. And I think Washington State is from the standpoint of, yeah, we know a state income tax is coming. We've had the whole tax Amazon and, Seattle, and a lot of corporations, they're going to locate in Seattle because, that's the flagship city and it's kind of where everything happens. And it's where a lot of the business happens. And so, all these taxes and just this climate of, we're welcoming of business, but not really. That's what you got going on. Plus, I think a lot of folks kind of see the writing on the wall of what has happened to Washington and where it's heading. And they don't want to have the liability in all the onerous regulations and just basically an anti-business environment. That's what we live in here in the state of Washington. And that's what a lot of people complained about California. In California, people are leaving in droves. Businesses are leaving in droves. But for every business that leaves California, a handful come in. So it's kind of like this back and forth because you've already got this, this state, and same thing with Washington, that's got a ton of businesses. And that always kind of draws people in versus a state where, we're trying to get things going here on, big corporate structure type deal in this industry, something like that. Florida had 86% more corporations move their headquarters there compared to the number of companies that chose to move their head out of Florida. 86% more moved in than out. The highest net gain of any state, according to Hire a Helper, who collected data from Securities and Exchange Commission filings. I was watching some report on, the one-way U-Haul, one-way ticket of U-Haul out. And California, was, I think, the number one state to leave from, and Texas was the number one state to move into. Florida was number two to move into. About what's been going on. Everybody knows, well, there's a mass exodus from California, but I don't think people recognize where we sit, Washington State sits within the whole corporate thing, within the whole, it's not feeling as pro-business as it once was. Bill Gates set up here, and Bill Gates has become kind of people are not fans of him. And, myself included, from the standpoint of, all right, you did all this Microsoft stuff. Then you went down, you became this authority that we're all supposed to listen to, and a bunch of stuff that I don't think it doesn't feel right to me, but whatever. A lot of people listen to Bill Gates, but yeah, at the time when Bill Gates set up, he set up business here in Washington State, particularly in Redmond, which is literally, I'm on Bell Red Road, which is Redmond. When he set that up, Washington was a pretty pro business state, and it was pretty aggressive at bringing businesses in with no income tax and, low barriers to entry. It wasn't a bad place to get going. Now we're kind of going down that other road of, all right, we need to pay for all this stuff. Let's tax the heck out of these businesses. And let's just make sure that we get our piece of the pie, the state government, right? Texas had a net gain of 71%, while Arizona was 65. So Arizona, Texas, and Florida kind of all right there, but Florida way ahead at 86%, Texas 71, Arizona 65. And that's that ratio of going in versus leaving. Washington State had an 83% more companies leaving it than moving in, including media company Arena Group and ClearSign Technologies, a developer of emission control solutions. What does that actually mean? 83% more companies leaving it than coming in. I mean, that's something that needs to be, you got to watch out for that. It's not like we've got this exodus of there's nobody in downtown anymore. We know that that's not true, but there's this trend. And when these trends, they develop this like vacuum that happens. That's an interesting one for Washington State. Doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, this is the state where we had CHOP, right? An autonomous zone where our mayor said, no police. We don't want any police. In fact, police officers, will you guys give up your precinct? So when you've got that going on from the mayor of your flagship city, I mean, is it surprising that businesses are like, I don't think so. Let's head out here before we get a massive corporate tax, something along those lines. I always love it how the leadership in Washington State is the rich and the businesses, they need to pay their fair share. Well, if you got rid of them, what would your tax base look like? Yeah. And Amazon did just that in Seattle. Tax Amazon, that's fine, but we're going to leave. And they have moved so many more employees over to here to Bellevue. Some of that had to do with safety issues as well. Some of the buildings they had in Seattle, they were in areas that, tricky at best. So New York, 51%. So we're talking the ratios of companies leaving versus moving in. Washington at 83, New York at numero dos at 51%, and California at 46%. So Washington State leading the pack and having businesses leave. California was way ahead of the pack for years and years, for decades, I believe, because they've got, policy that where people are like, yeah, we do not want to operate a business with the onerous regulation, the over-regulation that's happened in California. But it's also got this mass of business that just kind of keeps chunking along, right? Bigger than, so many countries. And California just is so massive. And massive, not only on a population base, but on a business production and everything else. So you can afford, if you're the state of California, you can, afford to hemorrhage out a bunch of companies and a bunch of jobs. And that has happened. But, like Governor Newsom said, and I hate to agree with them, hey, yeah, we've had some people leave Florida, but we've also had a bunch of people come from Florida to California. It's just the ratio to leaving California and going to Florida is a little bit higher. So you've got that going on as well. Chuck DeVore, former California State Assemblyman and Chief National Initiatives Officer at Texas Public Policy Foundation, said many corporations are moving to Texas because it's a central location in the U.S., allowing for shipments to arrive across the U.S. quicker. All right, but not every business is moving product. So many of them are digital, right? But they're still going to Texas because licensing, real estate is cheaper. It's easier. You don't have the governmental regulation. You don't have the ridiculous carbon tax making our gasoline expensive. You don't have just all of these little things that have kind of chipped away at Washington residents and particularly businesses that make it onerous to do business. I see all the stuff that goes on as owning 3 businesses. I see it on the daily. And I'm just kind of used to it. And if I was running a much bigger scale business that, maybe sold a product instead of basically operating services like appraisal and real estate brokerage. And, if I operated a business that was reliant upon, you're moving a lot of sales tax, things like that, it would be really enticing to just say, pack her up. We're going to Texas and we're going to, I'm going to wind out my career down there. But everything that I've built is here in Bellevue. So I'm going to be here, and the tax base. Yeah. And the regulation, I'm already all set up. I'm existing here. I'm going to ride it out here for as long as I need to. My home is here. And so I'm not going anywhere soon, but as soon as I roll up all that's going on here, which I don't know how that'll go, but I can podcast for a long time. I'll roll up the appraisal companies in the brokerage before I, stop podcasting. That's the game plan anyway. So expect to see me here for a long time. I hope you're subscribed. All right. He said, this is the guy from former California State Assemblyman who's now in Texas. He said many corporations move because they're motivated by costs. Do you remember when we saw all the celebrities leaving during the beginning of COVID? They're like, yeah, if I got to deal with all this nonsense in California, I'm out. And you know who was the number one indicator of that we looked at? Joe Rogan. And why was that so important? Well, because he was going to be coming into $200 million. There's a little bit of a tax issue there, right? So he booked it out before that whole big, huge deal came down. That's a smart move. And I'm sure there was a bunch of other stuff going on there. I think he's got some younger kids, quite a bit younger than mine. And he just didn't want to raise his kids in the education system, even in private schools in California. He didn't want them to be around that kind of environment because they were in LA. And, things are not super duper there. They're super duper there if you're trying to be a Hollywood star or a movie star. You got that whole thing going on. But I find LA to be really fake and just kind of disingenuous. You know what I mean? You go down there and you're like, everybody is pretending to be something that they're not, which is, they're actors. All right. So everything is just like, okay, that guy's got a super fancy car, but he is a waiter at a restaurant trying to get his break. You got a lot of that going on. Whereas here in Washington State, we don't have as much of that. We don't have as many, pretty people and that kind of thing. Got a lot of Antifa members. Does that count for something? I mean, pretty strong. Yeah. Now we got a lot of homeless people, but we still can't compete with LA on the homeless issue, right? So not just taxation, of course, talking about motivated by cost, why people are leaving Washington State, not just taxation, of course, but the cost for the lawsuit environment. DeVore said, the cost to comply with a multitude of different types of regulations, whether they be environmental regulations or labor force compliance, land costs, as well as electricity costs. So you're talking like manufacturing, or, I'm throwing that out there as an example where the environmental regulations would hit you hard. Texas, blow and go. And it's been that way. I mean, you remember the S&L crisis of the late 80s? And I do, because the Federal Financial Institution Reform Recovery Enforcement Act, FIREA, came out of that, which in turn dictated that appraisers get licensed. We didn't have licensing before that. And that, legislation came out of basically the S&L failure, that a lot of that happened down in Texas, where if you're a developer, you go buy a bank and you lend yourself a lot of money. I mean, God bless America, right? Don't mess with Texas. So Texas had that whole thing of, what are you guys doing? Oh, I see what you're doing. That makes sense. Till the market goes sideways. And then some regulation comes in. And then people are like, no, you can't buy a bank and lend to yourself through some LLC. But man, those were some go-go days down in Texas. I spent some time down there. My parents moved there in '89 into Dallas. And man, they were developing stuff in Texas as a state. They were just going. And then the crash happened, and a lot of crashes. But Texas overall is, if you want to be a home builder, that's not a bad spot to be, because you got some pretty cheap land, and you've got, lack of regulation. And a lot of that has to do with the standpoint of, if you look at land here, it's really pretty, or you've got views, or you've got big trees, or you've got something, physically like nice about it. In Texas, flat, clay-based soil. You might look at some foothills. People always say, Sean, Texas isn't flat. I live in the hill country. And I'm like, okay, yeah, those are little tiny hills. When we talk about hills here in Washington State, we talk about 14,400 foot Mount Rainier, a mountain, a real mountain. We got a bunch of those. They're called the Cascade volcanoes. And so, it's a big difference between that and little tiny foothills. But in Texas, you don't have all that environmental stuff to worry about. All right, send your freeway that away. It's going to be fine. A little bit of eminent domain on either side, and we'll clear this area out. There goes our highway. We got plenty of land on either side. We'll just keep building north until we hit Oklahoma. And that's literally, what they've done. And because they can. Here in Washington State, we've got a growth management act that just restricts our development. Everything is super expensive. And that's one of the reasons I think a lot of people don't realize why housing is so high here in the Pacific Northwest, because of the barriers to entry of construction are so high. Like in California, the regulations are so high that, all right, if you want to build here, that's fine. But here's your building permit. Oh, we're in Texas. Fraction of that. So not just taxation, of course, but also the cost for lawsuit environment. You got the regulations, the environmental, we talked about, labor force compliance, and you've got a labor pool in these other states as well, right? That people can go to and go, all right, a lot of people are coming to Texas. A lot of people are going to Florida. You've got a built-in population base that can do the job. So why wouldn't we move our company here? Land costs are cheaper in Florida and in Texas. They've risen quite a bit. I mean, don't be fooled into that. That's not all that cheap, because things have gone up, but things have gone up in a lot of the cities where the population has gone, just because that's how it goes. Right. And electricity costs. We used to have some really cheap electricity. We used to have some hydroelectric energy at the beginning of the whole crypto thing here in Washington State. Eastern Washington, because of big, huge dams, they had some of the cheapest electricity costs. So people were scoping out, little businesses that had the big electric ability to take down the big amounts of electricity, so they could run all of those processors and then run the fans to cool them down. And that was a huge thing in a lot of little communities here in Eastern Washington. But now our electricity costs, they're still relatively inexpensive, but they are more, I believe they're more than Texas, and they're more than Florida. So you've got a bunch of costs, and then also just transportation, just getting stuff to the Pacific Northwest. We're upper left USA. So if your product is coming in, into wherever, it's probably not coming into Seattle. So then you got to have, you got to have transportation costs of moving stuff around. And we are literally, doesn't get much closer to Canada than here. So those are factors too. It's like moving stuff. Whereas my businesses don't move anything. Everything that we do is here. So we're already located here, and we're not building anything either. So, you've got some major differences that are out there. But I think the overall trend for Washington State, not good. But this is also nothing new, because I think people who've been running businesses for a long time kind of look at, and I talk with a lot of the older generation, those who are in the process of retiring or probably should have retired a long time ago, but a lot of those guys are diehard, and they'll retire when, their body hits a casket. Literally, that's how they'll go out. Yep, going to work today. What happened to Johnny? Well, yeah, he went to work and died. I mean, there's a generation out there that, enjoy doing what they're doing, and they've built enough wealth and they're just going to keep on going. Those are folks that are saying, yeah, I wouldn't be running a business here in Washington State. I would go to. As far as people living, you got to give up the whole, outdoor dream that people think of Seattle as, which is, it is. You go hiking, you got water sports, you got the ocean, you've got woods, you've got all that stuff. You're into that. If you got biking, go down to Portland, ride your bike around. Epic stuff, right? Epic stuff. But then you got the whole, all right, here's your housing cost. Your average home is going to be $900,000 with a $200,000 down payment. You are just over 20% down. Your mortgage payment's going to be $5,921 a month. Are you okay with that? Like, Texas is looking good. Florida is looking good. I can get a cheap house there. Yeah, but then you got to live it. You can't ride your bike around. So you got to make your choices. But Washington does not surprise me at all. Look at some of the ridiculous stuff we've got going on. We're just a poster child for ridiculousness. That's why it's perfect for me, because I got podcasts for days. And if I got nothing going in Washington State, well, we just bop down to Portland. There's something going on in Portland. Portland doesn't work out. No news that day. San Fran. Oh, it's the Mecca, right? It's the Mecca of things going sideways. How about, I haven't done a podcast on it yet. How about a NASCAR race? I know I'm getting totally off topic, but who cares? How about a NASCAR race in downtown Chicago? That's happening. A NASCAR race. What? Who in the world decided this was a good idea? It's literally in downtown. A NASCAR race. Can you think of a worse idea? Now, it's not on the west side. It's not on the south side. So, you know what I mean? But still, NASCAR and Chicago? Mayor Lori Lightfoot came up with this one, and she just kind of shoved it down everybody's throats. They are not prepared. They don't have enough people at the airport. They're worried about the track. They're worried about construction time, getting the thing going. I looked at where the track is going to be, and it's downtown. It's like two rectangles kind of, close together. So they're just going to, go around like that. But NASCAR, are we going to get another Let's Go Brandon out of NASCAR in Chicago? I hope so. That would be funny. I love the Let's Go Brandon. And it came out of a NASCAR race, right? Okay. Enough diversion. That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being here. I'll catch up with you in the next one. Bye for now.